Thank you, everybody, for coming and taking time out of your week and your evening to come learn about how to succeed in written events and presentations. My name is Mr. Goldfinger. I'm part of the Florida DECA Board of Advisors. I teach at Coral Glades High School in Broward County in South Florida. A little bit about me. I got on the next slide here. Okay, about me. I've been teaching 7 years at Coral Glades High School. I was actually a DECA member in high school myself. I graduated from Cypress Bay High School, class of 2005. Mr. Hosier was my teacher, who will be following behind me here to talk about people interested in becoming a Florida DECA officer. So I kind of been through a lot of what you guys are going through as far as DECA is concerned in high school. Um, as I said at the top here, I believe I'm well versed in DECA papers and DECA paper writing and presentation writing. Since I've been at Coral Glades, with the exception of obviously last nationals because it was canceled, we've had a group in the top 20 every year that I've been a teacher. So it's a streak that I'm very proud of, and I'd like to continue. So I'm going to give you some tips during the presentation today, and this is normally what I would tell any one of my students in regards to writing DECA papers or doing a presentation, but obviously every chapter and every advisor is going to be different. So at least if you could take one little thing away from anything you hear tonight, hopefully it'll help you in the future in writing your DECA paper. Oops. Okay, so I'm going to just briefly go through an overview of what is a written event for anybody who hasn't even done one before and is brand new to this. Not going to spend too much time on it. I'd rather focus the main portion of our time this evening on tangible tips that I can really give you and tangible examples. So a written event, there's 10 and 20 page options. They vary by focus. There's entrepreneurship papers, research-based papers, and big project management, chapter project event papers. And my biggest recommendation for whatever written event you choose is to choose your interest. And most importantly, if you're going to work with a partner, to find somebody who also shares that similar interest. Working with your best friends isn't necessarily always the best option. You want to find somebody who's going to have a similar passion to you, who's going to take it as seriously as you do, especially if you want to get to the higher levels of competition. You want somebody who's going to be putting in the same amount of time as you. In my DECA chapter, I never tell people directly they shouldn't or should work together unless I think it's a huge bad idea. But you always want to look for people that are going to share your common interest in whatever DECA paper that you're going to end up potentially writing. Okay, so again, these are just an introduction. I'm not going to spend too much time here. But the 10-page paper, so we have the integrated marketing campaign, which is available for integrated marketing campaign service, product, or event. So basically for this paper, you choose a real product, service, or event, and you're going to put on a marketing campaign that lasts no more than 45 days. So for example, let's say you wanted to promote a football game, regardless of where it is. Go 45 days prior, and what are you going to do to successfully market that football game to get people to go to that football game to raise sales or whatever it might be? Okay, so that's kind of the focal point there. We have the startup business plan, which is the development of a proposal of a new business venture. And we have innovation plan, which is the development of an innovative product, service, or business to the marketplace. So normally we see a lot of just innovative ideas here as opposed to businesses in the startup business plan, but those vary for the 10-page paper options. I know you see 10 and 20-page papers here, but it's really not that bad. It's really not that scary. It's, if you really dedicate the time to it, it's something that you can, accomplish and tackle. Just like anything that you put your mind to in life, a lot of it is hard work. But if you put the time and effort into it, you will, hopefully turn out and result something that is of quality. Okay, now we move into the 20-page papers. So these are the 20-page papers dealing with entrepreneurship in some way. So we first have the franchise business plan. So you're developing a proposal to buy into an existing franchise. So whether it be like, I'm going to open up a new McDonald's in wherever you're going to open it up. One of the examples that I'm going to show you from my own chapter was in franchise business plan. So I can kind of go into that a little bit when we get to that point. Then we have the independent business plan, which is the development of a comprehensive proposal to start a new business venture. And then we have the international business plan, which you're starting a new business venture, but in an international setting. Okay, so in another country. and you're going to have to do research on that other country. You're going to have to research their cultural impact, their economy, their laws, if they have any tax or business restrictions, etc. In addition to that, it can be a brand new business, like you're starting your own business from scratch in an international setting, or it could be a business that already exists. You're just offering a new product or service in this international setting. Okay, then we have the research papers, and every year the research paper topic changes. So this year the topic for the research paper is the development of a strategy to rebuild customer loyalty and spending as a result of business disruption for at least the previous 6 months. So there are 5 categories here. Based on the business that you choose, it would fall into one of these 5 categories. So for example, if you wanted to do this research paper on a bank, it would fall into the finance operations research events. If you wanted to do it on a Hilton hotel location, it would fall into hospitality and tourism, etc. When we go to the DECA website, I'll show you where you can see the list of all business categories that are encompassed in each one of these different categories, so you can kind of gauge based on the information provided on the DECA website. Okay, and then lastly, before we get into really like some tips that I'll go over, is we have the big project management events, and every chapter is allowed to put on one of these events per category. I don't know how your DECA chapter kind of handles these things. I know for our DECA chapter, basically it's first offered to our DECA officers, who come up and make proposals for how they're potentially going to do these different big projects, like different community service efforts, etc. Our officers have first choice, and then once our officers are assigned to different projects, then we offer it kind of to the leaders, the upper level kids, or any of the leaders in our DECA chapter who just don't happen to serve as officers. So that's how we handle it. I would recommend talking to your advisor to see if you guys don't do these things, if they're okay with you doing these things. Obviously, I know in a e-learning and virtual setting, it's going to be significantly more difficult to put on some type of events of a large magnitude. But depending on where you're located throughout the state, your situation might be different. In Broward County, we're not really allowed to put on events at all. So I would have a conversation with your advisor and see if you guys don't do these already. Is it something you guys can feasibly do? So that's kind of where that stands. Later on, I'll show you very briefly our DECA paper from 2 years ago that won first in the world in financial literacy. So you can kind of gauge and have an understanding on that. Before I move on to the tips, and I know I might have gone a little bit fast, does anybody have any questions at all before I keep going? No questions. Okay, cool. All right. Oops. Okay, so the next couple slides here, I wrote on here what I would call Mr. Goldfinger-isms for DECA papers. So these are things I say and tips that I give to my students that are writing DECA papers. Again, this is just my interpretation of different things. Every advisor is going to, recommend certain things, but this is just kind of how I approach writing different aspects of the DECA paper. So the first one is choose what you know or who you know. This is going back to, following your interest or passion. If you're interested in entrepreneurship, maybe lean towards a paper in entrepreneurship. If you work at a fast food restaurant, maybe do your DECA paper on that fast food restaurant. Who you know. If your parent works at, Publix, maybe you do the research paper on Publix because you know somebody who could get you information that would be important for your success in that research paper. So really start there. Already talked about picking the right partners. That's so important. You want to make sure that people are going to be dedicated and putting in the time and effort that you're willing to put in yourself. And then I put here, start early and don't procrastinate. My students that are doing DECA papers started, they should have started the second day of school. We talked about it back in August. There's still plenty of time to potentially do a DECA paper, but you want to make sure that you put the time into it that's necessary. Don't wait until the last second to do all 10 pages on the same night. It's not going to end up well. Or 20 pages on the same night. And don't procrastinate. Make a schedule for yourself. Make a timeline. My students are given an outline with due dates, and I collect it for a grade as part of my class. So all those things go into account. Don't procrastinate. You'll see this several times on the slide here. Act like it's real. Okay, you have to approach the DECA paper like this is real life. If you're writing an entrepreneurship paper and the goal is to get money for your business, you need to act and pretend like that's the real thing. You have to pretend like you're not a high school student writing this DECA paper for a competition. My best recommendation is to pretend like it's real. One of the things I also tell my students is to avoid writing in first person. Don't write things like I did this or I did that. Any sentence that can be written that has the word I in it can be reworded that doesn't have first person or third person point of view. Okay? You can say our group, things like that. That's okay. But I tell my students to kind of avoid those things and kind of reword sentences to be like, the name of the company is looking to do this or whatever it might be. Put the time into your research and networking. Research for any of the DECA papers is going to be vitally important. You want to make sure that you're looking up the proper information. I'm going to talk on the next slide about making sure you have accurate timelines and budgets. You could go find all of these things for different budgets, starting a business, different financial statements. All of those things, for the most part, could be found on the internet. I also put networking on here. We've had students that have worked with they've done a franchise business plan and they reached out to somebody who operates and manages different businesses to see the inner workings of the business, to get inside information. One of our groups that got top 20 in the world a couple of years ago did Topgolf. They met with a gentleman who owned and operated a Topgolf location, and they really got the ins and outs of the business so they could apply it to their research paper. So even a little bit of research and networking and calling people and emailing people and trying to figure out additional information will only set you apart. One of my biggest pet peeves is to not put a section header by itself on its own page. So like if you're writing a section of your DECA paper and then you have like a couple sentences left, just start the next section on the next page. Okay, this is just things that I've picked up from when I wrote business plans in the business world before I was a teacher. Have consistency with your themes and your colors and any graphs that you have. Use the same style of graphs throughout the paper. Use the same color schemes, because again, if you want to make something that looks visually appealing, and one of the examples I'll show you here in a second, you'll kind of see that. I wrote on here visual appealing and save it as PDFs. When you eventually at the end, if you save the file as a PDF, so if you're working in Google Docs or you're working in Word, if you save it as a PDF, the PDF will lock in the formatting and structural whatever. I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but it'll lock in your logistical, the way it's going to look if you print it or whatever. So I would recommend saving it as a PDF and double checking it looks the way that you want it to look. I have very high expectations for my DECA papers. So it's very important that it's visually appealing, because again, if we're going back to the thing I said before and you're acting like it's real, if this was real life and you were going to get a loan for your business and the paper didn't look great, investors might not want to invest in your business plan because you didn't take the time to make it look like a professional document. Okay, so everything I'm going to circle back to and everything that I talk about is going to really hone in on the acting like it's real. It's very important. Does anybody have any questions on these before I go to the next slide? No. Okay, cool. We have more. Okay. So I put on here something I say all the time is no pictures for the sake of pictures. If you have a picture in a DECA paper, it should be there for a reason. All right? Don't put a random picture of a stock photo of a smiley face or random stick figures holding hands. Okay? That's clearly just a picture there for the sake of taking up room. You want your pictures and your graphs to mean something. You want them to be evidential. You want them to be there to support what you're trying to show or explain in that sentence or that paragraph or whatever it might be. Your DECA paper should be something that people enjoy reading. It should flow. It should be something where somebody doesn't start and stop all the time. It's important to check your grammar and spelling and sentences. Again, going back to the act like it's real thing, as you can see 2 bullet points down here. If this was real and you were asking people for money and you had tons of spelling errors, they know you didn't take time to really care to potentially get their money in a serious way. So you want to kind of look at that. If you're using it on the computer, you have spell check. I would recommend utilizing those things to make sure that The words are spelled right. Your sentence structure is correct. It's something that somebody would enjoy reading and getting through. Okay? Make sure you use the DECA guide. The DECA guide is your best friend. I will load up the DECA website here in a little bit. And make sure you're writing the executive summary last. Even though the executive summary is the first thing that it says goes in your DECA paper, it's the last thing that you write. Okay? You save that to the end. It's a summary of everything you did. Again, act like it's real a second time. Okay? Another key thing that I talk about is write with your partners, not separate from your partners. What I mean by that is, and I know that it might be difficult in an e-learning setting, but get on a call with your partners. Share a Google Doc. Write it together. Do those kinds of things. Because if I'm working with Mr. Benedict, who was on here before, the way I write things and my tone of voice is going to be different than the way Mr. Benedict writes things and Mr. Benedict's tone of voice. Okay? So sometimes if somebody's reading it, it'll become clear that a different person wrote different parts. So work together and write together with them. Use past paper examples. If your chapter has old DECA papers that people have wrote, look at those. DECA sells old, the national winning first place papers on their website. Purchase some of those. Maybe your chapter can purchase some of those. Using past papers as examples is definitely going to really show you exactly what you should be doing. You want to make sure you have realistic budgets and timelines. Do research. Okay? If the business if it only really needed $1 million, let's say, and you didn't do the research and you said we're going to make $100 million, if there was a judge or somebody reading that and they realize it's not realistic, they're going to mark you off for that. So do research to the best of your ability to come up with realistic budgets and timelines. And then the last thing here that I can think of is have somebody proofread it for you. It takes somebody not that much time, proofread it for you, make some recommendations, make some edits. And then I wrote in here, check for penalty points, which when we go to the DECA website, I'll kind of show you that as well. Okay. Anybody have any questions on my tips for papers before I move to presentations? No. Okay, cool. Okay. So some tips for presentation. So how do you go about making a presentation? So presentation is 15 minutes total. It includes time for judges' questions. So what I tell my students is, normally, you want to make your presentation around 10 minutes and probably leave about 5 minutes for judges' questions. The judges' questions are not predetermined, so they're going to come up with any questions that they have when they're looking and they're listening to your presentation. What materials you're allowed? The DECA guide says anything you can feasibly carry. So if we have an in-person competition, anything you can hold in your hand, you can bring into the room. If you have any monetary items, they can only be shown to the judge. They can't be left with the judge. You can have boards, which my chapter normally does. You can have PowerPoints. One is not necessarily better than the other. Whatever you're comfortable using for a presentation medium is what I would recommend utilizing. Picture it as Shark Tank, anything that you could potentially use to your benefit. Okay? So some Mr. Goldfinger-isms about presentations. You want to build your presentation around the DECA rubric. And when I go to the DECA website, they provide you information on what the judges are going to look for. Use that to kind of build your presentation, but don't be blunt. And what I mean by that is, if number one is, did they talk about the target market? Don't say in your presentation, now I'm going to discuss the target market. Like, build it into your presentation, but use the rubric as a guide. I tell my students to have a script and memorize it. I know DECA doesn't technically say you can't use note cards or anything like that, but again, I have very high expectations, so my students know that note cards are not allowed. Again, I can only speak for me. Every DECA chapter is going to be different, but I tell my students to have scripts, and they have to memorize, and they have to practice, and they have to do practice runs in front of me memorized. And the one thing I tell them if they have a script and they memorize it is if they mess up, don't screw up, right? Take a breath, compose yourself, and keep going. If you have a script, nobody knows what's written on that script but you, right? If you're looking at a judge, the judge doesn't know what you have written down. So don't freak out if something goes wrong. You want to make sure you introduce yourself and create a good hook. You want to have something at the beginning that's really going to engage the judge that's listening to you. You want to make sure that you engage them and hook them into your presentation. You want to make a good impression. How will they remember you? They're going to see a whole bunch of presentations throughout the day, potentially. If you're the first one they see, what are you going to do to make sure that they remember you 5 hours later? Okay, So make an impression however you can. Have a good take with your partners, a good give and take, and match your partner's energy. Okay, you don't want one person to be looking at the floor, talking quiet, and one person all energetic and happy. You want to make sure that you're matching your partner's energy. You want to have it more Shark Tank and less infomercial. Focus on that. Watch episodes of Shark Tank. See what kind of they do. I always tell my students to start with May We Set Up, because the setup time for any materials you have is part of the time that you have to present. So all of my students always start with asking the judge if they're okay if they set up. Oops. Okay. Last couple things here. You want to practice and time yourself. Practice in the mirror. Practice in front of a family member. Okay. You want to engage with the judge in some way. Okay. Ask them a question as part of your presentation. Give them presentation materials. My students always give different brochures and different, pieces of items to show as part of their presentation. The group I mentioned earlier that did Topgolf, they had custom golf balls made for their fictitious franchise, and they just showed it to the judge as part of their presentation. Okay, any way you can engage the judge potentially will help you. I tell my students to match, the partners match if they're giving a presentation, and then preferably match with the company. So for example, the paper I'm going to show you, and the student is in the chat here, they did the franchise business plan on Orange Theory, and all the partners wore something that was orange during their presentation. Okay, again, it goes to the consistency and the theme of the different presentation that we're doing. Again, act like it's real. I cannot say that enough. You need to take the role of this is real life, and you're really asking for money or whatever it might be, the goal of your paper. So try to act like it's real, and that's going to give you the best mindset to really make sure that you approach it the right way. Don't talk too fast. Breathe and talk clearly. Okay, you want to make sure the judge understands you. Prepare fake questions during practice. Again, the judge is going to potentially come up with any questions that they might see while they're listening to your presentation. So if you're practicing in front of a parent, ask your parent to come up with fake questions that they might notice during your presentation. Okay, you want things to be visually appealing and have materials that are going to back up and support what you're talking about. So if you have a bunch of financial information, maybe you print out your financial information and you give it to the judge as kind of a handout, so they have additional information to follow along with. So anything you can additionally show them will help you during your presentation. And the last thing here that I came up with that I think is important is answer question to parts you didn't present. So for example, going back to the me and Mr. Benedict, let's say me and Mr. Benedict were doing a DECA paper, and during my script, I was talking about the target markets, let's say. If the judge asks a question about the target markets, I tell my students that the other student should answer it. Mr. Benedict should answer the question about the target market, because it shows that both members of the group know their paper and know their presentation inside and out. I don't just know the parts I memorized. Mr. Benedict doesn't just know the parts that he memorized. We know everything together. So this is a cohesive effort, and we both are very knowledgeable about the subjects. So that's kind of the tips before I show some samples of different things that we've done. Anybody have any questions about any of the tips? No. Okay, cool. All righty. Oops, I went too far. Okay, so some examples here. So let me unshare the PowerPoint and share this PDF. Okay, so as I mentioned, DECA Inc. sells the previous winners of different DECA papers. So as I mentioned 2 years ago, at ICDC in Orlando, our group for Financial Literacy Promotion Project won first in the world. And I just want to load this up again. This is available for purchase. I'm not showing you anything necessarily that's not available to anyone. Just kind of showing you kind of the thing. So we got the cover page here, their table of contents. And it's a lot less words and a lot more, as you can see here, pictures and aesthetically pleasing things. Okay, their page numbers are $ as opposed to just the page number with a little piggy bank there. Okay, they have good color schemes with green with the charts. If I scroll down here, oops. Okay, paragraphs, all the sections are where they need to be. Oopsie. Okay, they have their bullet points here as green. It says COIN. They termed an acronym to kind of go with their project. Okay, they showed pictures. Okay, no pictures for the sake of pictures. All the pictures mean something. Here's a social media post. Here's a picture from the event that they did. Okay. Again, orange, green, pink. You can see kind of a consistency across the board as we go throughout the paper. Same kind of graphs. You saw those graphs at the beginning. Same kind of graphs throughout. Okay, and again, I understand I have high expectations for my DECA papers. Don't get me wrong. I understand that. But this is just kind of the things that I expect my students to know. And again, this is available for $10 from the DECA website. Coral Glades DECA does not receive any of the proceeds. So that's just, I wanted to show that one. So that was for a chapter project, but I wanted to show, again, another one for, again, the students in the chat here. She gave me permission to show this. So this is a franchise business plan that made it to nationals 2 years ago. They did Orange Theory. This was the cover of their paper. I asked my students to put in effort to create creative cover pages for their paper. They normally either use Photoshop or Canva to design some of these things. So here's the cover of their DECA paper. Okay, again, they did it on Orange Theory, and they were opening a Orange Theory in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So you can see here they used orange. I tell my students to put the name of the company in orange or whatever color they want because it stands out. So that's something that I asked them to do as well. So we can see a lot of pictures here. Again, same kind of thing, right? Pictures serve a purpose. Okay, graphs serve a purpose. There's no pictures for the sake of pictures. Okay, I normally recommend my students put the logo of the business somewhere on the page, whether in the header or the footer, whatever it might be. Okay, again, orange color scheme throughout. Okay, they have a map of their territory of their proposed business. Okay, their chart, their organizational chart was oranges. Okay, so again, no pictures for the sake of pictures. Lots of tables, lots of charts. Finances are in orange. Okay, good color scheme across the board. Then we get to the end there. So that was their paper. So there was the cover, and there was the paper. So here's their board. So in our DECA chapter, one of the main things that we recommend is doing boards, and these boards are normally professionally done. They're designed normally often through Canva, and are printed. Normally they go to Signorama or Minuteman Express or Office Depot, whatever it might be. Obviously, in an e-learning setting, we might have a lot more PowerPoints, but whatever presentation materials are going to work best for you is something that I would recommend utilizing. So if I zoom in a little bit, we see the front of the board here. Here's the center of the board, which I zoom in on the bottom here. But again, you can see things clearly. There's not a lot of clutter on here. Again, the boards in your presentation material should be things that help supplement and support your presentation. Okay, there shouldn't be paragraphs and paragraphs and paragraphs of text on your board. Okay, it should be just things that are going to help facilitate. Okay, you can see here they kind of use the Orange Theory theme here. The graphs are part of bicycle wheels. Okay, they had the person lifting weights over here with the graphs. Okay, so again, visually appealing, not so much information on it, right? Again, it's used to support your presentation, if all else, not dominate the presentation. And then here's their script. I'm not going to necessarily go over the script, but this is something that they create and they write, and they have cues to when to change the slide, so they know when to change the slide. And they all share this with each other, so they know exactly who's next. They know exactly what's going on. They're prepared for really anything. They have may we set up? They talk about, are you ready for a presentation that's going to be fantastic and make you sweat? Again, a good hook to kind of get the judge engaged in what you're talking about. So these are all things that are normal commonplace in my DECA chapter as far as writing DECA papers and presentations are concerned. Are there any questions on those examples before I load up the DECA website? And then I'll be done. I'm trying to get back to the Teams group, but it's not letting me get there. Hold on. Oh, there we go. Okay, no questions. Okay, cool. Okay, so lastly, as I said, the DECA website should be your best friend. So if we go to high school competitive events, all right, and you scroll down, you'll see there's a whole bunch of tabs here. And just if you click on one of the DECA events, we'll click on the research paper because I said I'd bring it here. So there's a couple things that are going to be on here. Number one, for the research papers, as I said, if you click on that link, you'll see the list of companies that are encompassed in every research paper. Okay, so for business services, it says providing services to business on a fee or contract basis, providing services to consumers, human resources companies, information technology companies, legal firms, training and development organization, healthcare services like hospitals, libraries, construction companies, etc. Okay, so if you want to do the research paper, just visit this page and become familiar with which event your company that you choose would fall into. Okay. In addition, in any of the DECA papers, you'll see a bunch of links off to the side here. Number one is the guidelines. So if you click the guidelines, it's going to show you the guideline. Not only will it show you exactly how the DECA paper is supposed to be organized, all right, so the sections of your DECA paper need to look exactly like this guideline. If you scroll down more, it'll show you exactly how you're going to be graded for both your paper, written evaluation form, and your presentation. So this is what I was talking about before, to build your presentation around the scoring form for the presentation. Again, if right here it says describe methods used in the research study, don't bluntly say, now I'm going to describe the methods used in the research study. Just understand that these are kind of the things the judge has been informed to kind of look at. Okay, so those are available to you. They're on the DECA website for any of the DECA papers. I encourage you to look at them. I encourage you to click the links and to see what's there. Okay, you must follow this guideline for the written portion to a T. It must be part 2A is this, part 2B is this, part 3A is this, etc. Okay, if I go back, now it brought me to the main homepage, which is weird. Okay, if you click sample event, it's going to load up a sample event. Now, it'll only load up the first 5 pages, but you can at least see the first 5 pages of a sample event that they provide you. Again, on the DECA shop, they provide previous years that you can purchase. I know for my DECA chapter, I purchased them all. I purchased them all for last year or for 2019. But again, I know not all DECA chapters are able to do that, so that's just something I do. But there's at least 5 pages. Again, talk to your DECA advisor. See if you guys have samples there. They will be a big help. Don't plagiarize the samples, though. I've had students do that, and I catch them. Don't plagiarize the samples. Just use them as assistants. And then the last thing I said is check for penalty points. So if you click on the penalty point checklist, these are things that you're going to be looking for, and you don't want to make sure that any of these things you're going to be dinged for. So like, for example, it says everything must be typed, no handwritten corrections, or you're going to get points off. Make sure that that doesn't exist in your DECA paper. Be your own best advocate. Okay? Make sure that you're doing everything right to make sure that you maximize your potential for a score on your DECA paper. Right? Make sure you're being your own best advocate and you're doing your due diligence. Right? But all that information, again, is on the DECA website under high school competitive events. It's there for you. DECA gives it to you for any of the papers. Entrepreneurship. They're all there. Okay? Make the DECA website and the DECA guides your best friend in writing a DECA paper. Okay. So I believe, if I go back to my PowerPoint, I believe that is it. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. So here's the way to contact me. If you have any additional questions or anything that I can help you with, on Twitter, my teacher Twitter is @DrewGoldfinger, so you're welcome to tweet me anytime, and I can try to help you in any way that I can. There's my email address, drew.goldfinger@browardschools.com, so if for any reason you have a question of anything I went over, please reach out. I will gladly help you. As I said before, I serve on the Florida Board of Advisors, so my job is to assist any members in Florida DECA, even outside of my own DECA chapter, so I definitely am willing to help and assist in any way. Okay, but does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns?
Hi, Drew. My name is DECA, and I have 2 questions. I'm from Hillsborough County.
Okay, you're kind of fading in and out, but I can hear you.
Okay,
Go ahead.
clearer?
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess my first question is, I'm competing in the startup business plan, and one of my biggest concerns is, I've been practicing since probably March of this year to compete this year. And one of my questions is, does the grading and like how, you end up qualifying also depend on how creative your product or your plan is?
Well, you have to remember, it's going to come down to whoever's looking and reading your paper, right? And how creative the things are. Like I said, you're going to have to make an impression with the judge. The way I kind of use a metaphor with my students is, if you think about sports, right? Sports every year has a free agency period. When sports teams want a particular player, they don't want that player to visit them and then leave and then go visit another team. They want that player to be so impressed in the moment they have them that they sign a contract with them in that moment. So you have to approach your presentation and writing your DECA paper in kind of the same way. What are you going to do that's going to impress the judge and set you apart from everybody else? So creativity certainly does go a long way in that. But again, everything is subjective. The person who reads it might, feel differently about different things. So you kind of just have to do the best you can, but try your best to stand out in whatever way that you can, in both the paper and the presentation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. And my second question was regarding, everything being online this year. So will e-learners, well, just anyone who's doing a written event, I wasn't able to join in the first part of this meeting, so I just wanted to clarify, how will we be, presenting at like a district level, since we're used to having the judges live in front of us asking questions? Will that question feature not be um, there this year? Because I know my advisor was telling us that it'll be like a 15-minute portal to record and upload our videos, I believe. But I just want to clarify that.
Sure. So every district has basically been given the guidelines to handle it the way they best see fit. I know us in Broward, we're going to attempt to do live presentations. As far as the upper levels of competition like states and nationals, those decisions have not been made as of yet, because obviously we're dealing with a situation that we really have no clue where it's going to go over the next couple months. But if that's what your advisor told you for your county, that's, I guess, what your county has decided to do. So I would just, reinforce that information with your advisor to make sure that that is accurate, and ask that question of your advisor as to how the question portion would go, if they're even going to have a question portion. But, every district is going to be different for district competition.
All right. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
No problem. Anybody else? Does anybody else have any questions?